Everyone, it is now 10 o'clock. Good morning. I am Aaron Blumberg, Swiftlin's Continuing Education Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Accidental Systems Librarianship. We have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for this morning with Maureen McCrory. Maureen McCrory has an MLIS and a PhD and was a catalog librarian and reference librarian at Oberlin College from 1995 to 2000 and has been a technical services librarian at Hillsdale College for the past 16 years. Her responsibilities at Hillsdale, for all of those years have included the supervision of acquisitions, collection development, and cataloging of all monographic and AV material, and the management of the library's innovative ILS. On her time off from Hillsdale, Maureen teaches a course in knowledge organization online for Dominican University. Please welcome Maureen and enjoy her webinar this morning. Maureen?
Thanks very much, Aaron. Can you hear me okay? I will go ahead. I hope everybody can hear me. Great, thank you very much. Um, I'm Maureen. Thank you very much for having me this morning. This is the fourth of these webinars I've done. I was thinking about this series, if you can call it that. It's kind of what Maureen does. What Maureen's done. It's actually almost been 17 years now. That bio was written last year, but in August I will have been in this job for 17 years. And when I came to this job, I had music cataloging experience as a professional and some reference experience as a professional. I had done some work that might be considered systems, but it was kind of as an added thing that just because I was interested in it, I did it in addition to my regular responsibilities. So when I came into this job that included not only cataloging, but also collection development and systems, I had a lot to learn. um, I knew the basics of all of that just from my coursework, but I needed to learn a lot on the job. And so all of these webinars have kind of been about how I did that in a way. I hope they're helpful. Been doing it for a long time, and so I might have some insights, but I also hope that some of these can be dialogues, and so that you can chime in and let me know how you have done these things too, because I know a lot of you probably are accidental systems librarians. I want to start, if we could, with the poll. The first poll, want to know what type of library you're currently working in. I forget exactly how these work. There it goes. So if you could just answer the poll, let me know if you currently work in an academic, public school, or special library. That would be really helpful just so I have an idea of who's attending. This will very much be from the perspective of an academic librarian. I've been an academic librarian throughout my career, but being an accidental systems librarian, I think it's very common in academic libraries. It might even be more common in public libraries, and there's a wider range of things that you have to do as a systems librarian in a public library. So I haven't ever done that, but I hope I can offer some insight in how I might do that. So thank you very much. See, I think we can probably, and that looks like mostly public, some academic. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide. The goals for this webinar I see as defining systems librarianship. Probably you all know what that is, but I'll look at some written definitions of it. Explain who can be a systems librarian and how you can become one accidentally. Basically, anyone can be a systems librarian. Any librarian can also be a systems librarian. We'll talk a little bit about why that is. I'm just going to describe what I do, just so my own personal experience, what I do related to systems and how I deal with the problems I encounter in that part of my job. And then I'm going to discuss some of the things that other systems librarians do, the things that I don't do, and how I might go about learning what I'd need to learn to do those things. And then I also want to explore a little bit about how systems librarians can learn those things, how they can approach learning new skills when those skills are needed. That's a really important aspect of systems librarianship. And throughout the webinar, please, if you have questions, feel free to type them in chat, and I'll try to address them. I'll try to keep my eye on that. I have no problem with stopping what I'm doing. With I don't think I have a problem. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, this webinar is very much based, I'm relying very heavily on Nicole Engard's The Accidental Systems Librarian. This is the second edition of a book that was published by Rachel Singer Gordon in 2003 originally. Nicole Engard updated it in 2012. Of course, that was 5 years ago now. It's already dated. A lot of the things she talked about are things that systems librarians just don't need to do anymore. Some of the software she mentions doesn't exist anymore. And so it kind of has to be taken as a guide, but not always literally. But it's very, very helpful in describing what systems librarians do, especially accidental systems librarians, people who came into systems librarianship with different background, not necessarily intending to go into systems when they came into the field. So I'm going to quote it heavily. I tried to cite where I could, but there are some places where there are direct quotations that I've stated, but just a caveat that a lot of this is quoted from the book. It's a very helpful book if you want to take a look at it. A definition I found that was most helpful of what a systems librarian actually is from Eric Lees Morgan's essay from the mid 90s on being a systems librarian. This is available online, and it's been quoted. It was quoted in the first edition of the Accidental Systems Librarian. Systems librarianship is the art and science of combining the principles of librarianship with the abilities of computing technology. And really, when you read that, that pretty much describes every librarian. All librarians have to deal with computers nowadays. It's just part of what we do. There's kind of no getting around that. We all have to deal with technology and make technology work to help us serve our users better. There was another poll I wanted to do and see if I was going to do it on the second slide. I think we can go ahead and do it now. So if you could go ahead and post that now, Erin. So the question is, what does your current job require that is not strictly systems? So if you have a job now where you do cataloging, but you also do systems, or if you do collection development, you also do systems, that would be really helpful to know what other people do. And I'll describe what I do, because I do a lot of things other than just systems. Yeah, so a lot of catalogers. That actually surprises me. But it certainly is definitely part of my job, a big part of my job. It's why I got my job. Some collection development, and not too much reference and circulation. That's a little surprising too, and that might be something that's more reflective of public libraries, where if you're in a public library and you're responsible for systems, that's more than enough, so you wouldn't do reference or circulation. But I know there are librarians who do those things who also do systems, and a lot of you do more than one thing, and that is typical, I believe, of all small libraries, and certainly true of the library where I work. Yeah, more than one of the above. That's a whole lot of us and a whole lot of catalogers. Yeah, yeah. And people are realizing, oh yeah, I do that. I do a lot more of that. All right, that's good. Thank you very much. So my current job, my current title is Technical Services Librarian. I work at Hillsdale College, which is a small liberal arts college in South Central Michigan, a very rural setting. We have about 1,500 students. We also have a graduate program now in one department, in the politics department, but basically we're a small liberal arts college. Yeah, in small libraries, you have to do everything. Everybody wears a lot of hats. And so the hats I wear, according to our documentation, I'm responsible for acquisitions and cataloging of monographs, which we basically define as all firm orders, things we order one time, including all formats, books, CDs, videos. I'm also responsible for remote access to the library's electronic resources, and so that falls under that systems heading. And I'm the system coordinator for the library's automated system, and that's the main reason that I'm called the systems librarian, because I'm the person that people go to when there's a problem with our integrated library system. I became an accidental systems librarian just because I got this job, basically. I got this job because I knew about cataloging. They needed somebody who could come in and start cataloging, and I did have cataloging education and experience. I also knew somebody that worked here, and so that was the main reason that I'm the person that's here. Somebody knew me and said, this person might be good for this job, and I had the educational background that was needed. Um, the systems part of my job existed. The person that was in this job previously moved into the director's position, and so he was still here and was able to help me through a lot of this. He did a whole lot of the things I do, but he had never worked, for instance, with HTML, and so I started taking on some responsibilities in this position that he hadn't worked on. I had a little bit of coding experience, which was new. Uh, Nobody here had any. I had very, very little, but I had a basic idea of how coding worked. And I just like solving problems and working with computers. I always have. And so it was, even though I didn't have a lot of the technical knowledge, I had the desire to learn. And so that was important too. And it kind of helped the job to evolve into something that I wanted to do and something that I could do. It's definitely an advantage of a small institution where you are wearing a lot of hats. You can kind of decide what some of those hats might be. So this is one of those places where I've lifted something directly from the Accidental Systems Librarian, second edition. This is the list in that book of all the possible job titles that a systems librarian might have. Um, Information systems librarian, webmaster, digital services, manager of systems, a systems analyst might be a systems librarian, and e-services, um, head of information technology, um, especially in a public library, that might be a common title. Instruction liaison librarian, library systems coordinator, innovative tech manager. I thought that was a pretty good title. Metadata librarian. Certainly, most catalogers would consider themselves metadata librarians. Um, Assistant Director of Technical Services for Library Systems. That's a mouthful. Systems Manager, Informatics Librarian. And this is kind of a new field, and it's not something I would have thought of as a systems librarian's role, but I suppose it is. If you're dealing with informatics, that might be considered systems in some libraries. Web Services Librarian, Integrated Digital Systems, Head of Application Development and Management. Doesn't even mention libraries. I thought that was pretty interesting. Systems Manager and a Library Systems Liaison Officer. So my title, the title I've had throughout the 17 years I've had this job, isn't listed here at all. Technical Services Librarian isn't listed there, but Technical Services Librarian is the title for a job I have that is definitely a systems librarian job. And so there's a wide range of titles that might be applied to a systems librarian's position. And so the other poll that I wanted to do you see something similar to your current job in this list? So Erin, I don't know if it's possible. Can you see the list? Can you make it possible to see the list while people answer this question? If you see something in this list that's similar to the title, thank you, good. Similar to the title that you currently have. And give people a minute to look at that. I found it kind of fascinating that there was this huge list and my title wasn't even in there. But it looks like that's pretty common. A lot of you are saying no, you don't see your title reflected in these job listings. So that's pretty interesting. So we have 14 participants. Wow, the vast majority of us do not see our titles reflected here. That's fascinating. Yeah, good. Okay, thank you very much. Good. Very interesting. Okay, so what I currently do and what I've done with systems in this job specifically, I am the main support contact for our ILS functions, for everything our ILS does. If there's a problem with it, I'm the first person people come to say this isn't working, and I'm most often the person that contacts Innovative Interfaces, which is our ILS vendor currently. Um, Others do contact the vendor occasionally if it's an emergency situation or I'm on vacation, something like that. But I've tried to ask people to copy me on any emails having to do with uh, vendor contact, just so that I have a record of what's been discussed with the vendor. Um, I think it's important in any library that those records are kept and that one person is responsible for keeping those records. So even if somebody else is talking with the vendor, they try to report what that discussion was to me. Um, I'm responsible for the catalog display changes, and so this is mostly work in HTML and CSS. So I've done complete designs based on vendor supplied templates. Innovative Interfaces gives you templates for redesign of the catalog. I've done this a couple of times over the 17 years. When I first came to Hillsdale, the web OPAC was being used very, very seldomly, the web version of the catalog. They were still using a text-based system, mostly on dumb terminals on a local area network. And there was also some use of the text-based system uh, with internet access, but the web page that was the access to the catalog had been created by the former director who had moved into a public services librarian position. He didn't really have time to spend a whole lot of that, and so to spend on that, and so I ended up taking over that responsibility. I kind of asked, since I'm the cataloger, and I have some HTML experience, I'd kind of like to take over the management of the catalog display. And he was more than happy to give that up, since he had at that point reference and ILL responsibilities as well. And so that's become part of my job, is to make sure that the catalog display is current and functional. I haven't done a major redesign in quite a while. What we have seems to work, and so I've left it as is. Physical maintenance of servers and backup tapes, I no longer do, but I have. We have moved now to a cloud-based environment, to a hosted environment, so I no longer do the physical maintenance of servers and backup tapes, but it definitely was part of my job when I started in this position. Maintenance of SSL certificates. When we joined a statewide resource sharing program, Innovative Interfaces InReach product, which had been used in Ohio for OhioLink, in Michigan was implemented in the Melcat program, and that's what we use in Michigan. Still, we started that in 2005, and part of the requirement of that was securing your catalog, obtaining an SSL certificate for your catalog. And so that became part of my responsibility, is to secure and manage SSL certificates having to do with the catalog. And that has grown over the years. It's become more important, somewhat more complicated, having to do with the proxy server. Maintenance of the link resolver. This is something that has evolved in this position since I've been in it. In about 2004, 2005, we subscribed to Serial Solutions Link Resolver, which was managed completely by Serial Solutions. But in 2008, I believe, we decided to purchase Innovative Interfaces Link Resolver. Innovative Interfaces Link Resolver, they called it WebBridge. They still do call it WebBridge, involved a whole lot more configuration on the part of the library. And so I had to learn how to do that. And I have to say that is something that I've only recently, within the last few years, felt like I learned to do. It had to do with learning more about the other parts of the system that are involved, that are used by the link resolver. I didn't understand all of those parts, and there's so many parts. I could make it work somewhat, but to really make it function optimally, I had to understand more about the system, and that just came from use and editing of the system on a regular basis. That's the kind of thing we saved money by purchasing this software instead of continuing to subscribe to the service from Serial Solutions, but it required a lot of time on my part to manage it. Um, I've also done a lot of other projects over the years that involved editing and adapting of code. Um, the only code that I really had much training with when I started this job was HTML. I'd looked a little bit at CSS. Um, but as this job evolved, I've had to work in XML and Java and Perl and PHP and other existing coding related to whatever I needed to do. And it mostly involved me just taking code that was already written, finding where I could make tweaks to make it do what I needed it to do. I can't think of any instance where I've written code myself, where I've written code from scratch. I've almost always taken something and adapted it, and usually something in a code I had never used before. And so there's a lot of that involved, I think, in accidental systems librarianship is taking what other people have done and adapting it to what you need to do. It's very much a cooperative sort of profession. Things that I don't do that might be considered systems, and this has to do with being in an academic library. Our networking is managed by a campus IT department, and so I don't need to go out and figure out how we're going to connect to the internet and how we're going to safely do that and how our patrons are going to safely do that. That's done by someone else on campus. Um, Definitely, like I say, that would definitely be different in a public library, I believe. Um, Web page and LibGuide or LibGuide creation and maintenance is something that a lot of systems librarians do, especially in academic libraries. In our library, the home page, the page that has just information about the library, and the LibGuides are done by a public services librarian who is doing reference and instruction, and so she has the a better knowledge of what's needed. And so that's how we have split those web editing responsibilities. That librarian is also responsible for the maintenance of the public computers and printers and copiers. In her case, it involves a lot of interaction with the IT department. The IT department purchases those machines and is responsible for the maintenance of them, but she is responsible for communicating with them. That in a lot of libraries that would be the job of the systems librarian, but we at our library we've split that out between public and technical services. And I mentioned this a little bit. I had very, very minimal coding of what could be called coding background when I started this job. And you'll see how old I am based on these descriptions, but I vaguely remember a class, actually I remember it pretty well, it was a lot of fun, a class in basic language coding in high school. We were using Apple IIs with floppy, literally floppy disks. That must have been about 1982, 1983. I didn't do much until a programming class in the C language, I believe. It had to have been C that I was learning around 1986, 1987 when I was in college, another small liberal arts college that I went to. Um, I just took that for fun as an elective credit, and it was a lot of fun. That probably gave me a little bit more knowledge of how computers work, but I really didn't remember any specifics of the language itself. Over the years as a professional, I've taken some 1 and 2 day workshops. I remember, well, and I was able to find a list of some of the things I'd done. Web publishing in the late 90s, a Dreamweaver course, which is uh, a HTML creator, basically. RSS used for a while for a few things. A SQL course that I took from our statewide network, like you're taking this course. And then APIs using PHP. All of these things, they were all helpful, but I don't use them on a day-to-day basis. But they all help to contribute to my ability to learn what I need kind of on the fly as I need it. And I've also taken some online tutorials and Codecademy classes, which are really, really helpful. I'm going to be mentioning those a couple of times. So my background was helpful but not comprehensive at all. And for the possible duties, again, this is a page lifted directly from Accidental Systems Librarian. Um, the possible duties of a systems librarian. It's a pretty long list of the things you might do, and it actually doesn't include everything that I do or everything that other systems librarians do. Um, a lot of this stuff these are things that all librarians do to some extent, things like project management, general help desk functions. Um, but there are some things that are very unique to systems librarianship. So I've gone through and I've highlighted the things that I actually do from this list. And so then I put them onto another slide. And so you can see it's about half of the things that are listed are things that I, in some capacity, do in my current position. So just the things that I pulled out from this list that I actually do. I'm involved in hardware selection, installation, purchasing, and troubleshooting. I don't do all of that. Again, that is something we do in conjunction with our IT department at the college. I am involved in software selection, installation, purchasing, and support. It depends on the software. The library specific software, I'm usually the person responsible for support and responsible for communication with the vendor. But for some of this, it's a cooperation again with our IT department. Um, Internet support in this position is pretty much limited to the proxy service, to working again with the proxy server. Because that is purchased from Innovative Interfaces. It's part of our ILS essentially. It actually lives on the same server as our ILS. And so that ends up falling to me. Um, Database vendor liaison, we have another technical services librarian who is responsible for serials, cataloging and acquisitions. And so she's kind of the first stop for those kind of things. But if the problems are technical, if they start involving uh, coding of any sort or the proxy server or the link resolver, then those problems end up coming to me, and so I'll do communication with the database vendors. I contribute to electronic resource selection and implementation, but that at our library is actually done by the management team, by the 5 librarians who are on the staff. We meet on a weekly basis and discuss uh, what resources we want to select. It's managed by the other technical services librarian, but we're all involved. Similarly with digitizing, we have an archivist who does a lot of digitizing of photographs. I have videos on my desk that need to be digitized that I have not done yet, that need to be changed. We need to reformat them into a usable format. They're things that are out of copyright. Um, Staff and patron technology training is an ongoing thing. It's mostly staff training in this particular position. Um, I do a lot of that kind of as needed. I don't have meetings with all the staff to do technology training. It's more on a one-on-one as needed basis. Integrated library system or ILS management definitely is part of my job. We haven't done any major migrations. We moved from Millennium to Sierra back in 2011, but that was really that wasn't really a migration. It was the same vendor, basically the same system. But I am responsible for managing upgrades and for training on new features for the staff. Project management, again, I think this is something all librarians have to do at this point, but I do a lot of it. Part of it is more as the catalog librarian, but a lot of it has to do with systems, especially that move to Sierra. Creating technical documentation, I do a lot of that. When I was reading through the Accidental Systems Librarian, they recommended a lot of screenshots for technical documentation. I recommend that as well, although I don't do it. I work best with written instructions, and so I tend to create documentation that would work for me. And I've never had a problem with people not understanding it, especially if I'm able to go and demonstrate to them um, after they've read the documentation. Um, but definitely that is part of my job to create that documentation. It probably would be better if I used screenshots in that documentation. I act as a liaison between the library staff and the computer services staff, certainly. Um, with our IT department, although other librarians do that as well, and staff do contact IT directly, and I don't try to keep track of those trouble tickets. And then writing and reviewing requests for proposals. Um, that's something that we haven't done at this library very much, but the systems librarian would absolutely be involved in that. All of this I learned to do partly. The coursework I had helped, but almost all of it I learned to do on the job as needed. That is my systems librarianship experience in a nutshell. I learned what I needed when I needed to learn it, and I think that is typical. From what I've read, that is the way most so-called accidental systems librarians learn. They learn by Googling the problems they have, and I rely heavily on Wikipedia. I think it's becoming an essential resource for all librarians, but in systems it's something I look at almost every day to find out what something is, what it means, what its origin is, and to find um, to get a bibliography of what resources I should be looking at to learn something new. So that list of what a systems librarian might do, about half of that is things I don't do. And so I thought I'd talk now about these things. So the highlighted things here are the things that I really don't do in my current position. And so I've put those on another list here. I don't do, and when I put together this slide, I actually forgot that I had managed a local area network. And as I said before, when I first came here, uh, the use of the catalog was mostly through dumb terminals. It was a text-based system through dumb terminals, and those were all on a local area network, a LAN. And so I did manage that. It was in cooperation with the catalog, with the ILS vendor, with Innovative Interfaces. We had bought the hardware from them, and we managed the network with their help. But that was definitely part of my responsibility, and I'd forgotten about it. It's been so long since we have not relied on web-based catalogs. It's been a long, long time, but I did do that at one time, but I don't do it anymore. Not at all responsible for securing of our network or for getting us on the internet. Internet support, I am responsible for that proxy server, but for other internet support, that goes through our IT department. Security and stability of the public computing environment, again, in an academic library, it's something that the larger campus environment has to be concerned with too, and so our IT department takes care of that. The web page design and maintenance, I don't do simply because somebody else does it. It's something that I could do, but it really, in our job, in our library, it really is considered a public services function. And so the public librarians do that. And similarly with our social network presence, the same public services librarian is responsible for our Facebook page. She has an Instagram page that she maintains. And so that's a public services function. The general help desk functions, we all do a little bit of that. But when it comes to technical help for our patrons, we generally a lot of that is done by our IT department. Overseeing the library's technology commons, again, is a public services function in our library, although I'm brought in sometimes to troubleshoot if necessary. Electronic resource selection, as I said, it is managed mostly by another technical services librarian, although I am involved in it. Original computer programming, I simply haven't had to do. Luckily, since I wouldn't know exactly where to start. Even though I've had some training, I would have to do some study to figure that out, and I just haven't had to do it. I've always been able to find something that was close to what I want to do and adapt it. Patron technology training, again, in this library, it's considered a public services function, so I'm not involved in it too much. And then database development and programming. for the most part, it is the responsibility of the other technical services librarians and the public services librarians. The things from that list, so I've taken this list of the things that I don't do from the big list, and I've broken it out into what I could probably do today, the things that I think that I could probably just jump in right now and do without too much training. I have done web page design and I've worked on web pages, and so web page and or intranet design and maintenance, I could take that on if necessary, and I have. In summers, the public services librarian responsible for all of that uh, was on maternity leave last year for 3 months, and so I took those responsibilities on again while she was gone. Um, General help desk functions, like I said, we do a little bit of that. I could do more if necessary. Overseeing the library's technology commons, I pretty much know what's out there and could probably manage that. Electronic resource selection, since I'm involved in it now, it's probably something that I could take on if needed. And patron technology training, I would probably have to kind of brush up on some skills in teaching that kind of thing, but it's something that I probably could pick up just based on my other experience. I'd have to learn some of those things too. So about half of that list, I would have to learn quite a bit in order to meet those needs, to perform those functions. The network administration and security responsibilities, I would have a lot to learn, and I've tried to learn over the years and tried to take some courses, but it's become very, very complicated. And so it's something that I know I would need more training to really manage appropriately. Internet support, router, wireless, and firewall configuration. It's the kind of thing I do at home for my family's networking, but it's not something I've done on a large scale, and it's something I would have to learn a lot about in order to fully manage. Security and stability, similarly, don't know much about it, and it's a very, very important thing. I would have to learn something. Managing the library's social network presence. Again, I do my own social networking, but I don't do it extensively. Uh, I would have to do some study to figure that out, and original computer programming. I would have to learn current languages and learn how to apply those. I could learn some of this online. A lot of this, of course, you could learn online currently. Especially managing the social network presence, I would start out with the help pages for whatever networks we were interested in joining and in using. Then I would read through the LIS literature, through the library literature, to see what social networks are most useful to libraries and how libraries are using those social networks. I would feel very uncomfortable just jumping in to Instagram, for instance, without knowing how other libraries were using it. Not necessarily using it the same way, but I would want to know how other libraries were using it and whether or not they found that helpful and effective. And I'd want to see if there were current best practices around for library use of those things. And for original computer programming, once I'd figured out what I needed to do and what language might work, a lot of that I think I could learn online, especially with those Codecademy workshops. Those are a lot of fun to do. Anyone can do them. You just follow the link, you choose what you want to learn. I believe you have to pay for some of them, but a lot of them are free. Um, Things like that, online tutorials to learn programming. Since I have a little bit of knowledge of programming and how it works, but even if I didn't, I think a lot of that is the kind of thing that you can learn online just with online tutorials. I would probably seek formal training to learn network administration and security, simply because security is so important and the risks are constantly changing and they're becoming global risks um, involving ours and our patrons' finances and personal security. Because security is so important, I would feel that I needed some formal training, some formal instruction from professionals in that area in order to manage it for my library. Internet support, including router, wireless, and firewall configuration, again, because security is so important. And because hardware is such a big investment, if we were going to invest again in hardware in this library, I would want to make sure I knew how to protect that hardware and how to use it to its full potential, because there's a lot of money involved. This is one of the reasons that a hosted system using cloud-based services is so helpful. The more you can use the cloud, in my opinion, the better, especially if you're an accidental systems librarian. If systems is not the main thing you do or is not the main thing that brought you into librarianship, being able to turn that kind of responsibility over to someone else is very, very helpful. Security and stability of the public computer environment, again, because security is so important. And stability is key to meeting users' needs. If your users are coming into your library and they can't rely on the services you provide, on the computing services you provide, um, they're wasting their time, and you're not providing the service that I believe ethically we have a responsibility to provide. We might be the only way that some of our users can get online and can use computers for their life, for the things they need in their life, and we need to be able to make sure that that service is reliable and stable and safe. And so I would seek outside help in learning how to make that safe and stable, just because it's so important. So this slide is my tactics for troubleshooting. Troubleshooting is the main thing I do. That's what a systems librarian does. That's why a systems librarian is important on a library staff. All librarians have reference training of some sort. Use that reference training, the techniques you learn to find out exactly what someone is really asking when they ask a reference question, are the same techniques that you need to use to figure out what problem someone is having with your systems. You need to listen carefully to the full description of the problem. Don't assume that you understand. And this all comes from experience. I still jump to conclusions about what somebody's asking, or about what the problem is, or even about what the solution is possible. We had a problem recently, a menu option that wasn't available on the staff side of the catalog, and I had said for years, oh, there's no way they could do that, it would be too complicated. And then finally somebody said, I really would like if they could add this menu item. I said, well, I'll ask, but like I've said for the several years, I don't think it's going to be possible. I asked the vendor, is this possible? And they were able to do it in 5 minutes. I had assumed that it never would be possible. So you can't do that. You have to listen carefully to the problem, and you can't make assumptions, is the lesson there. If somebody asks you a question, has a problem, and the answer isn't clear to you immediately, you're going to have to ask that person for more information. You might have to ask to see a demonstration of the problem, or ask for an emailed explanation so that I can follow up. I do that quite a bit, partly just so that I can keep track of what problems people are having. And then if somebody else has a problem, I might search through my email to see if that question has been asked and answered before. If I don't find an answer, if I don't have an answer immediately when somebody has a problem, I will search for an answer online, or kind of as a last resort, unless it's something that I think would be more quickly handled this way, I do take the problem to the software or hardware vendor or whoever else might have an answer. Sometimes that's to our campus IT department. Frequently it is to a vendor. This is one of my favorite techniques for troubleshooting. If you're presented, if somebody comes to you and says, my computer's giving me this error code, that's a situation where, if at all possible, I go to the person's computer and look at what's happening myself. If it's something that I don't recognize, and if I can't go and look, I ask them for a screenshot, and I ask them to email me a screenshot, or to at least quote what the error has said. Once I have something like an error code that I don't recognize, I have no idea what it's talking about, I frequently will Google it as a phrase search. So in quotes, I will put whatever is displaying on the screen. I will just Google that phrase. This is one I just kind of pulled out of thin air. Error code 552. Turns out that is a problem that some people have. It's a Microsoft error that appears, an Outlook error that appears sometimes. This can be really helpful because there might be solutions online to this problem, or there might be something saying this is something you have to contact Microsoft about. Or this is something that nobody has found an answer to, buy a new computer. But it can be a really helpful way of troubleshooting and finding answers. And this applies even to ILS systems. You might have to do the same kind of search in a locked down environment, in a user environment of some sort provided by the vendor, but um, the same process can be really helpful, just searching for the code. If you can do a phrase search especially, that's really helpful. Uh, and so I do a lot of that kind of thing, searching in listservs. This is the Systems Librarianship listserv that's hosted by Indiana University. Very helpful listserv if you're interested in systems librarianship, a very helpful listserv to follow. And I was also, one of the slides that I didn't put on this list is the Code for Lib website and listserv, also a very helpful resource. But the archives for listservs like syslib and Code for Lib can be really good sources of archived problem solving. Just doing a search of the list itself on a particular phrase, maybe one of those error codes, can sometimes be your best source of information, and it would be information specific to libraries if you're searching library listservs. Troubleshooting with vendors. When I first started this job, I thought, oh, that's easy. I just call and I tell them what the problem is. But there's a little bit of an art to it. And how I deal with vendors has evolved over the 17 years that I've been doing this. I found it best to try to find the solution on my own. I'll sometimes save time by finding the solution on my own rather than going to the trouble of opening a call with a vendor, explaining the problem, documenting the problem, and communicating with the vendor. So I try first to find the answer before I call the vendor. I search the product manuals that the vendors have given us access to. I Google the problem, as I showed in that previous slide, or I search listserv archives. For innovative interfaces users, the innovative user group is a great source of information. They've moved recently from a listserv to a forum, but it's still a great source of information, and it's a searchable web page or web source that you can search for solutions to problems. I do that quite a bit. And if I don't find an answer there, I decide I have to contact the vendor. Before I call or before I start an email, I make sure that I can describe the problem in great detail and that I can provide examples and screenshots. I try to have all that ready ahead of time because I know they're going to ask for it, and I know they're not going to be able to help me much unless I can get into some a great deal of detail and to provide some examples. I sometimes have to find a new way to explain things. I have to use a lot of patience. If they don't understand what the problem is the first time I try to explain it, I have to find another way to explain it, maybe another example, maybe another screenshot. Maybe if I've opened the call email, I might have to pick up the phone or vice versa. And I also have to remember to follow up on calls when I don't get a response. In my case, this is frequently prompted by the person who had the complaint originally saying, has there been any action on such and such? And me saying, oh yes, sorry, I need to follow that up. Yes, sharing your screen with the vendor can be helpful. We do that a lot with our IT department. Innovative Interfaces doesn't do a whole lot of screen sharing. With them, I have mostly done screenshots. Um, that depends on the vendor. Yeah, and I think with when you're not working with an ILS, when you're working with things like networking, um, problems maybe with your ISP, something like that, yeah, screen sharing can be really important and really helpful. And helpful for you too, if you're able to, if you're trying to solve another staff member's problem and you're not able to go to that machine, if you can find a way to do a screen share, yeah, that's a great way to see what's happening, to have that person go through the steps they're following, and you might be able to see what the problem is once you see them do what they did before they found the problem. Very good point. For recording all of this, I do think it's very important to log the solutions you found, to record what problems have been found, what problems you've dealt with, and how you solved them. A written or electronic log, something like a spreadsheet, is really, really helpful, really useful, something you would want to archive and keep for future reference. I have not really done that too much. We tried to do it when we migrated from Millennium to Sierra, but honestly, it was very hard to keep up with for me. That was kind of just a personal preference. I have found it much more helpful to save emails, and luckily our IT department is very helpful and allows me to save as much email as I want. You can imagine over 17 years of systems work, I have a lot of saved emails, but they're very helpful. I search through my old emails on a regular basis when I know that we've addressed something in the past, when I can't remember exactly how. Um, I even frequently will write myself an email to explain what I did to solve a problem, and then I'll file that wherever I file the other emails having to do with similar problems. Very helpful just for that being able to search and find an answer in my email. They also, emails can be very helpful in communicating with the vendor. If you know you've had a similar problem and you've communicated via email with the vendor about that problem, it can be really helpful to forward that old email to the vendor to say, this is happening again. Same thing, see below for the history. I find that a very useful method. It's kind of low tech. It relies on having a little bit unlimited storage space in your email, but it's one approach that works. And in terms of improving your skills as a systems librarian, again, this is very, very important. Systems librarians have to learn on the fly. They have to learn at what they need when they need it. I have found that it's really helpful to not to be afraid to experiment, to especially when I'm working with the catalog display. I try to use a test environment that we have for that, but some things I need to just test in real time. Either we need the solution right away, or it's something that just wouldn't work in the test environment. It has to be tested live. I try to do that kind of thing on times when we're not so busy. In the academic library, that's in the summer. I try to do that kind of thing in the summer. Um, I try to be really upfront about doing these things, and if I mess things up, I try to be real to say immediately I'm sorry and to learn from my mistake. It's kind of part of the job is kind of being humble and knowing that you're going to mess things up, you're going to have to apologize, but you're going to learn from that, and your system will be stronger in the end once you're able to make these changes. Um, I would say that continuing education too is very, very important. The things that you can't learn online, the things that have to do with security and stability that you really need outside training for. Conferences are very helpful if you can get support for attending conferences. Very helpful to hear what other librarians are doing and to meet other librarians that can be a resource for you. Taking courses and webinars, a great thing to do if you're able to find the time and the funding. And additional degrees or certificates. My PhD is in Library and Information Science. I focused on cataloging, but the coursework really helped me in all aspects of my job, including systems librarianship. I'm able to see the bigger picture in a way that I was not able to before. It's true for my MLS as well. The master's degree gave me an understanding kind of the of why we do what we do in libraries. And so anything like that you can get, if you can get a certificate for something like the Microsoft systems, um, very, very helpful, not only to your own resume, but to your institution. And so if you can find a way to get funding through your institution, you can make a strong argument that these extra skills that boost your resume are also going to be very, very good for the library. And finally, I'd say that making connections, personal connections, is key, especially in systems librarianship. The best resource for any librarian in a new position is other librarians, whether they're at your institution or at other institutions. Keep communication open with your colleagues everywhere that you can find them, whether or not they're in libraries, but especially in libraries. Ask for help on listservs and from librarians you know that might have dealt with similar issues. Don't be afraid to ask for help and find mentors and be a mentor. Contribute to the conversation and continue to participate with others throughout your career. It's the best way to learn things and to solve problems. And you can contact me. As is clear from this presentation, a lot of this stuff I learned by doing, but maybe I've done something in the past that could be helpful to you. So please don't hesitate to contact me. The first email address is my address at my day job, and the second address is the address that I use teaching for Dominican. We have a couple of minutes if anybody has questions or comments that they want to add. Love to hear them. Love to talk with you more. If you have ways of dealing with systems problems that I haven't addressed, I'm sure there are many, many of them. I'd love to hear them. Oh, good. A few people are typing. That's wonderful. um, yeah, and feel free to look at the web pages I use. Like I said, I haven't updated our catalog. A list of listservs, yes. Erin, would it be possible for me to send you a list and have you send that out? That is something that I think I thought about doing and didn't do. Yes, I can do that. Yes, befriend your IT guys. I had a friend once who always baked cookies. If she had to go to the IT department, she would always bake them cookies. She would always take cookies. I always said, well, I don't want to go that far, but yes, you have to befriend your IT people. Absolutely. And learn to speak their language as much as you can, but admit when you can't. Yes, so I'm going to try to provide a list of listservs. Like I said, kind of for general systems librarianship, the syslib-L is great. Code for Lib, it's COD, the number 4, and LIB. That listserv is wonderful. You just Google Code for Lib or just syslib-L. Professional organizations, the big one is the Library and Information Technology Association, LITO, which is a division of ALA. That's the main one for systems librarians. Users groups for innovative interfaces, that's IUG, but there are users groups for a lot of the library systems, the ILS systems. Those are very, very helpful. Participating in those just as a conference attendee, but also as a presenter, or on the boards of those organizations. Very, very helpful. Medical libraries in a hospital system. Yeah, I don't know too much about it. A lot of this applies, but then you have a lot of privacy issues, and the security issues are huge in a medical library, and things like copyright become even more important. So, Medical Library Association is important for a systems librarian in a specific field like that. Yeah, Polaris keeps a record of tickets. ILS does that too, but I'm sorry, Innovative does that too, but it's a little bit limited. And so I keep those emails too, because sometimes I have emails that I can no longer access in innovative systems. And so that's something to keep in mind, that definitely use the vendor systems, but also know that it might not be around forever, and you might need information past when they're going to save it. Um, yeah, you do need to learn about privacy laws. That's hopefully your vendor is aware of those, but the privacy laws vary state to state. For instance, in Michigan, patron information, circulation information is considered private by law. We are not allowed legally to disclose that information. And so we did have to make sure when we went to the innovative system that innovative addressed privacy in a way that conformed to Michigan law. So yeah, that's definitely a big thing to look into when you're doing systems. All right, so you will get a PDF version of the presentation, yes, and I think that yes, I will send more information to Aaron. I think he will be able to um, answer some questions, send some information to you that way. Communicating with the ILS vendor, I do almost every day, and almost every day. I'd say that's, at least an hour of my time almost every day. It's a lot of time. That's a big part of the job. Maybe not that much, but I do it every day. Well, thank you all so very much, and please feel free to email me questions or comments if you have more. I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Maureen, for a wonderful webinar. Some information and a sneak peek of what is coming up. Attendees, it's not too late to register for tomorrow, Thursday, July 20th's Copyright and Digital Libraries webinar, or Friday, July 21st webinar, H's for Hidden Barriers, Workplace Success Through Inclusion. We encourage you to look at the upcoming webinars and workshops in months ahead, and hope you're all able to join us for future training opportunities. As always, please feel free to keep checking the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or look for your message from the Swiftland listserv or the Florida Library listserv. Thank you all for attending, and have a terrific weekend or week.